Okay, we've come together today once again to have a conversation. My name is Flint Sparks, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and also a Zen teacher, and my teacher, Dr. John Gladfelter. And so we're going to continue some conversations that we've begun about his teaching, about his training, his ideas about what it means to be a psychotherapist and a teacher. In some previous recordings, we've had conversations about his life, his history, and influences that have cultivated this kind of teaching. But today we're going to look specifically at the teaching and the therapy. So John.
Thank you. Very kind to me.
Oh, hey, John. We're going to continue our conversations.
All right.
The most significant part of the personal relationship that I've had with you, which you've had with tons of people over the years, has been one of both psychotherapy trainer, teacher, but also therapist. And for many years, those were maybe a little closer than they are these days. But I'm interested in both of those strands and how they kind of weave together and how you see that process. You know, there's an apprenticeship function. You've always talked about this being like an apprenticeship, which is sort of like, how can I be like you? But there's also a maturing function, I think, which is more like, how can I do what you do?
Yeah.
And so I wondered if you had thoughts about any of that and ways you think about those, about bringing up someone, because you've sort of raised many of us in some ways, as professionals anyway.
Yeah, and so much of that, again, from my point of view as a teacher, depends upon selection. Because it means if I'm going to work with somebody, I've got to know that there's a live person there, and there's more than just an audience or somebody watching. It's sort of like, it starts out with some kind of relationship. I have to know that we have some relationship going on.
Sure.
Because otherwise, I don't know who you are. You know, as I said, I grew up in the country, and to me, there's something about how one grows up. If one is on a farm, remote from a lot of people, I went to a one-room school. You know, high school was 5 miles away, and all kinds of kids all over the place. But to me, it was like, in the country, you either have a relationship with your neighbors or you don't. And it's a given. It's the fabric in which everything happens. Everything goes on.
Well, it's the thing that I must have absorbed in the way that you've taught and trained, because my whole perspective on working with people, both as a psychotherapist and as a teacher and as a Zen teacher, is really in that context of relationship. That is the foundation, it seems.
Well, that's basically, how the world is when you're on the farm and in the country. Is, the people next door may live a mile away, and you may not see them very often. But your relationship with them and theirs with you is it's both personal and impersonal. There's a great respect for boundaries and what goes on and so on. But at the same time, you know that if your barn is burning down, they'll come down and help. And so it's more than just a casual relationship. It's an acquaintanceship, but it also means always usually get to know an awful lot about their family backgrounds. They have in-laws. To me, it's the community, for instance, that I live in right now in town, is I just barely know one neighbor. And I've lived there 40 years. And the only reason I went next door is when I was locked out of my house and I had to borrow the phone to get a locksmith. And so I got to know the neighbors, spent about an hour with them. So now we have a waving acquaintance, but not much more than that. The other neighbor, I knew her husband, and she's there by herself. Her husband passed away, so again, it's a very distant relationship. It's not like in the country.
Not the same kind of fabric.
It's a very different kind of fabric.
Yeah.
Because in many ways, in the country, you really are dependent in a very significant way. Like if something really bad happens to you or your farm or whatever's going on, they're involved.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot not be involved. It's how it is.
Well, it's interesting you talk about that, given the the length of time some of your groups of students continue with you.
Yes.
Because it is a long term, there's a lot of attachment involved.
Always. To me, that's the foundation of it.
Mm-hmm.
Always has been.
So if the relationship, knowing that there's someone there to interact with,
Yeah.
and that there, what is the kind of spark that you recognize in a client or a student that says there's something here?
Probably that they listen. That I have to listen a little bit more carefully than I would ordinarily if it's a new relationship, because I really have to know a lot more than just what they said or what they do. And the basics are kind of given in the country. But to me, for instance, is when I evaluate candidates that I'm going to work with,
Mm-hmm.
I have to know that there's somebody there. And to me, I can tell that probably within 5 or 10 minutes.
And what does that mean exactly for you?
That I'm feeling safe with them. And I think of it as in terms of safety. Again, this is not a lot of country in this, is that the people that you get to know in the country are often intimately involved in some way with your life.
They're interdependent in some way.
Interdependent. And when students come in, that's one of the things I'm looking for. And I'm not sure how I do that, but it's sort of like I just do it. It's nothing that I could write down and say, what do I do? It is just I do it. I'm there.
Yeah.
And I'm there, and if they're not there, I'm going to know in 10 minutes at the most. 5 minutes probably.
Well, I would imagine over time, they would also get a feel for there's not much happening.
I think so.
Yeah. And what about with a client? What do you look for to know you have a client? You have someone you can work with.
Oh, I can work with anyone that walks in the door. No, see, I always say, I say to the clients, you have to consider that working with me can be dangerous.
Uh-huh.
So I want to caution you that working with me involves more than you realize. So I'm just giving you fair warning ahead of time.
Well, if someone that is unfamiliar with this process might not know what you're talking about.
I hope not.
But what are you saying to them?
Huh? Just what I'm saying, literally, is like, if you come in and start working with me, you're taking a risk. It's not like just talking to some strange old 80-year-old dude. It's like, no, I'm here and you're there, and this is risky.
Uh-huh. And what is it that's at risk?
That's the problem, it's unknown.
Ah, that's even more risky.
That's even more risky, because it's a risk for me too.
Oh yeah?
See, because I know that it's a risk for them. And that's what I'm trying to tell them, is that I'm not just some strange man with a sign on his door that says what he does, or what he is. It's more, if you wind up working with me, we're going to be together for quite a while.
Ah, so it's that link. That's part of what the risk is.
See, yeah,
You're stuck with me.
Yeah,
And I'm
stuck with them too.
Yeah, yeah.
See, because the notion used to be is that the client has to be there. They don't. They don't know how they got there. They think they do.
They have a story about it.
They have a story about it. They'll have a story about why they wound up making a phone call and setting an appointment, and why they come in. But they don't know. If they did, it'd be a rare individual. Well, there are going to be a few people who have been in therapy before, and so they've got a kind of a template to work from, but not a whole lot.
Yeah.
So they don't know what they're getting themselves into.
I know one time, I can't remember when it was, I asked you, there's some people who utilize that potential that you offer really well in therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And some people don't click or they don't bite.
That's right.
Doesn't work. And I asked you, what do you think the difference is? And one of the responses you gave in the past, which actually has been informative, you said the capacity to experience gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
And can you say a little more about that? That still rings true in that way?
I think so.
It did for me.
And it has to do with, it's nice to hear that when I say something and we talk a little bit, that they're listening to me. Because there's nothing that says that they have to or ought to or should. You know, it's like they've had some of what is a notion that's old-fashioned, but few people talk about it now. And it's called, you know, I grew up in calling it, what kind of upbringing did you have? It's because if you were brought up, I can tell. You know,
If you were brought up good.
if you were brought up good, you could tell right away. Because it's sort of like you kind of understand something naturally, that we're going to converse, and you're not going to do anything mean, and I'm not going to say anything mean, and we're going to find out how we can talk to each other. And a lot of it has to do with, you know, are we talking from the same page? Are we talking from within the same, do we have the same language?
Mm-hmm.
And I can spot that, you know, in 15 minutes.
So that's part of that capacity for resonance. Do we have that capacity? And then I also took from your comment about gratitude that there's some willingness. It's kind of the other side of narcissism. To feel a sense of joy or pleasure or willingness to offer oneself.
I'm glad they're there.
Yeah, and they can feel some of that glad
Yeah,
that they were there.
when they walk in the door, they will see on me a smile, probably, because I'm not sure I could do otherwise.
Uh-huh.
See, it's like, I'm glad to see you.
Uh-huh.
Because whether you're a customer or not, that's not that important. It's like, hey, we've got a way to communicate as two human beings.
Yeah, there's a human here.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, since I was your student at Fielding, we would enter into the initial workshop for acceptance.
Yeah.
And that's just a formality, but it also brings up the question of when a person is going to be a student,
Mm-hmm.
or even a client, in this case a student, what attitudes or things do you look for, or what kind of things would you say would defer a person's readiness to really be a student, or to train them?
Well, upbringing would be the first one.
But what qualities would you name?
Well, that we would greet each other, that we would enter into a common conversation about the weather, or their families, or how they got here, or...
They're basically socialized.
Basically socializing, of course. Because if they don't know how to do that, they're going to have a rough time as a therapist.
But there are people who come in who seem to be able to do that, and yet I've seen you defer their training, or suggest they get some work before they continue their training. Well, what is it that you're seeing, or feeling?
That they have no idea what they're getting into, and they're scared, and maybe they need to deal with their scare before I start working with them.
Because of the potent nature of the relationship?
Yeah.
So really that's what I'm hearing more and more as you talk, is that the relationship is the foundation,
Mm-hmm.
and the relationship is more potent than either a student or a client will know.
That's right. Can't know.
Uh-huh. Now you worked at the medical school for a good while,
Mm-hmm.
and then eventually, and for a good while now, have been at the Fielding Institute.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see difference in those kinds of students?
Sure.
I mean, are there different contexts?
Different contexts, but in many ways. Medical students have it clearly in their mind that if they're going to talk to a doctor, they're in medical school. If it's somebody that's a PhD, they're not sure. because it's many ways, it's almost as though there's a smell or an appearance to a doctor. A doctor has a doctor's demeanor. You know, it's talked about in medical schools and taught. It used to be, isn't it anymore? Bedside manner. Because in many ways, you know, what I can remember is when young doctors are you know, in medical school, the patient is still an object. It's not a person. And it's not the kind that's going to be depending on them. But once you're a doctor, it's as though they take on the role. And in many ways, you know, there are so many things that in life is dependent upon role definitions. And so, you know, it's like when we do some kinds of exercises, you do a family simulation. And you assign people in the group to be the father, the mother, the brother, the grandfather, and so on. They know how to do it. How do they know how to do that? How does everybody know how to be a brother, or a mother, or a father, or a grandfather? How the hell do do we all come equipped with scripts in our head? Damn right we do. We have an idea of how they are, and so somebody says, be a doctor, you know how to be a doctor. You can, people who can, you not only see it and hear it, you feel it. You know what voice to use. You know what's on your, you better be smiling if you're a doctor. You don't want to see a doctor who walks in scowling or frowning.
Although they do sometimes.
Oh, yes, they do sometimes. But that isn't the reason you're seeing them as your doctor, for sure.
So there's not only some consensus reality about this stuff, but there's also things we've taken in.
See, it's like, we carry all that stuff around in our heads all the time.
So then, in addition to that stuff, it's almost like they're introjects are taken in and played and lived forward.
Yes.
What are the key relational skills that you think of if someone's going to be excellent or really good at it out of that foundation?
They know how to use all those different parts of themselves innately, inherently. They don't have to worry about it.
They're not thinking about it.
They're not thinking about it. It's like when they come in my door and they want to be a student, they come in equipped as a student. They know how a student is supposed to act and say, talk and be. That's a part of our equipment as humans. We learn that by the time we're anywhere, in middle school, by the time you're in high school, you got all that stuff down. And then going to college is going to be another gap in which you're going to have to learn to be college. And then when it comes to medical school or graduate school, that's one level up. So it has to do with you're a little bit more serious, you're a little bit more careful with what you say. You want to be reasonable, sensible. You want to be a good student. You want to be like somebody who really wants to learn, whether you do or not.
In the way you're talking about it, it's as if that natural capacity would be unimpeded. But what about people that carry baggage from their own family or from educational experiences or other kind of experiences that are quite damaging?
See, from my point of view, that is always so obvious. People with baggage have got to wave at you. Hey, I'm a neurotic, or I'm depressed. God knows I'm depressed. Have I told you? You don't have to wonder. And they don't do that. They're not doing something on purpose. They are simply being who they are, very authentically. And they're not doing what I'm doing, which is watching them exquisitely, carefully. To me, it's sort of like it's everything they do. It's how they got their hand on the chair, where their other hand is, where their head is. It's not like, are they laid back? Or are they really attentive?
So you're getting information all the time.
all, see, it's like people can be completely silent and you can get to know them 15, 20 minutes.
Sure.
You watch somebody who's sitting there doing nothing for 20 minutes with you. What happens? They keep changing. They are sorting out, and they've learned to do this since they were this big. See, you watch kids play. Kids start playing at being grown up from the time they know there is such a thing. And so they learn, they practice it. You watch kids play. Kids are always playing grown up. And they will talk like it. When you listen, if you just can catch kids when they're not being watched or what's going on, when they're being natural, they're already all grown up. So they are working hard at it, and some of them are abject failures at it, of course. And some of them, yeah, and the other kids don't like them if they're too good at it. It's sort of like, it's how you can get picked on. If you're too damn smart, if you're too much if you're too much teacher,
I recognize that.
you get hell from your kids, the other kids in school. And being the brother of a teacher, when they found out that I had two school teachers, sisters, they all knew it.
Mm-hmm.
Because they knew how I knew how to act around teachers.
Yeah, I had a mother and a father who were teachers, so it's
Well,
the same.
of course, you walked in there, a trained patient, a trained student.
Yeah.
And I know I did, you know.
Well, one of the things you've talked about more in recent years than in earlier years, and maybe it's just a difference in the kind of language, but you talk a lot more, or you seem to pay a lot more attention to aspects of attachment and attunement in the relationship process.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a shift in you, or just a shift in the way you're talking about it? Because of the way it's in the literature.
The way I talk about it, I'm sure has changed greatly. Because I was in graduate school when Harlow was doing his monkeys,
Mm-hmm.
and we took it seriously, which it was. It was really a powerful demonstration of what attachment looked like. And of course, I grew up on a farm, and I grew up around attachment. Animals on the farm don't survive if they're not attached. And in fact, they are often endangered by the other animals if they're not properly animal, the way they're supposed to be there. And you watch that you can see it in chickens, geese, ducks, pigs, horses, cows, you name it. Animals live by attachment. And so you're not surprised in how they are attached to each other. Now it's sort of like, but being human, we don't bother to stop to think and recognize that until
They were animals.
people like Harlow and the other people who have done the research on attachment demonstrate how powerful it is.
Yeah. Has the new work on interpersonal neurobiology influenced your thinking?
Completely. I've moved very much in terms of what's being written about the research on it. And yeah, I incorporate it in what I do. To me, it's too powerful to ignore.
And when you talk about attachment in a therapeutic relationship, from an analytic perspective, they abstract it in terms of transference and countertransference and being appropriate around boundaries and not getting too close and all that. But what are your thoughts about what actually happened?
See, the old model is most of us, or at least I was trained, I was warned about transference.
So like you were warned about relationships.
Yes, absolutely.
But you were in the relationship business.
No, we weren't.
Oh.
We were in the fixing people business.
The treatment business.
Diagnosing people, treatment business, and so on. But no, the idea of having a relationship with the client was, if you were a student, you were a suspect.
Well, that's what I wondered about.
Yes.
But that's not how you trained us.
Because after you've done therapy for a while, you begin to understand what transference means. And transference gets exaggerated, I think. It gets overgeneralized. Because to me, the transference that we have is always based on projection. We project on other people what we know about other people. And so when somebody looks like one of those other people, that's how we treat them. And of course, if a patient comes in and sees you like a doctor, treats you like one. Of course it does. But it has nothing to do with therapy. If you're smart enough to recognize that, and recognize, well, that's transference. They're doing what they're supposed to do. Countertransference, I'm feeling what I'm supposed to be feeling. Of course. But is that a relationship? No, that's what happens when you begin a relationship. And you get things sorted out so you know what part of the relationship you are. You know, you're either a brother, you're a son, you're a daughter, you're whatever it is. And your relationship is based on roles. So you know what that is. The problem with helping people in therapy is that until you help them recognize you're not their mother, you're not their father, you're not their brother, you're not their grandfather, you're not their uncle, that you literally, the word I would say is disabuse them of that thinking. Because they're going to want to think of you that way. And you have to help them recognize you're not. Now that's often with clients really confusing. Because if you're not going to do that, what the hell are you going to do? See, then it's sort of like...
What do I do with a person if I'm not going to do that?
That's right. And so you try out a few things with the therapist. And hopefully the therapist recognizes that. Because in many ways what we are aware of, what I'm aware of now, and my thinking goes, is that, you know, one of my hobbies has been magic since I was a kid. And part of magic is mind reading. And so, you know, isn't it natural that I would wind up being a therapist? Do I read mind? Well, of course I do, damn it. And that's not just a joke. Because what the research is demonstrating is that all of us have a whole set of our brain that is a reflective sort of process. And what we pick up to reflect is the other person. Mm-hmm. So in many ways it's not as though we don't know what's going on with the other person, because the chances are we really do know.
It's what we do with it.
It's what we do with it. But it is the foundation with what we're going to do with it that counts.
Uh-huh.
And that is that then the client has to operate from the basis of, well, if you know so much, tell me what to do. Because they don't understand what that means. Is, do I understand you? Do I know about you? Yeah, I know a whole lot more about you than you know. But what I know about you isn't going to help you by telling you what it is I know. My task is to help you find out who the hell you are.
So that's the key shift.
Yes. Because they think they know what they want. They know what they want to change. And it's important to know what they want to change. Because, well, there are some people who come in who do know. Most don't. Most people are there out of desperation for whatever reason. Because they're scared, because they're angry, because they're confused, because they're upset. And they assume by going to somebody who's a psychologist that will help them find out their answers. And I don't say to them, I don't have any answers.
Yeah, they want to know the what to do. That's probably the least useful part of what we might offer.
Yes.
But they don't understand that.
That's right. Because they come in a way, wanting advice. Part of them knows it isn't going to help, because they probably heard it from other people. It's not as though they heard that from the therapist first. It isn't. It's that they've heard it from their friends, from their family, whatever it is, and they know better. But who else in the world is going to spend the hours and the time it takes for the therapist to do what I call contemplate who they're working with?
So this is a contemplative endeavor.
It has to start that way. Because in many ways it means that you cannot know a person right away. That it's going to take a lot of hours for you to get to know them and for them to get to know you. And there's no way around it. There are too many parts to it. Because I remember back in AGPA days, we spent a lot of time on nonverbal communication, which of course is behavioral, physical, facial, physical, positioning, body, everything about it. And so you suddenly realize after you looked at it for a while, how the hell can I know and be observing of all that? You don't. It's just there, and it is for you to know when a client's head goes over what you think is going on. Because they don't know that it's gone over.
Or what it means.
Or what it means. Or even what they're feeling. Because one of the things that we often do, or I do now, that I didn't used to do, is teach people about awareness. Because everybody believes they're aware. But they're aware of what their sensory input is. But very rarely do they stop and wonder, and when I am aware of that, and when I see those images, what am I feeling? Because the idea that we are such feeling creatures all the time, and I mean all the time, that there's not a hell of a lot going on. It's a part of it. It's not, you can't separate it out. It's like when somebody walks into my office and I see them and I look at them for a while, I begin to have feelings about them. I cannot not do that.
That's part of the animal nature, actually.
That's a part of the animal. That's what attachment is about. You know, if you watch animals, how they get acquainted. You know, we all know how two dogs get acquainted.
Sniffing.
Yes. And they sniff each other all over. Rear parts of the anatomy are more important. That tells more to the dog than the nose. But the nose is important. The whole animal is important to the dog. So if he gets a chance to go over you with his fine-tooth comb, he will. And he cannot not do that. Try to stop your dog from doing that. Forget it. He is being who he is. He is being a dog. That's how we are as humans. You know, we're a little bit more cautious and we're a little bit more sophisticated about that. We did have good upbringing. So we know how to go about doing that. And a lot of a good upbringing is that being able to sense the other person.
Well, that's some of what I'm hearing, is that the capacity to cultivate such a relationship in which one might learn well or change is that ability.
Yeah, and because in many ways, after, one has been doing this for most of his life, you cannot not do it.
Yeah, you can't not see it, sense it, feel it.
You cannot do it. It's automatic. Now, it does take a while to learn to do that. You have to get through a lot of your crazy shit, a lot of your upbringing, a lot of the neurotic stuff you got into that you thought helped you didn't. It takes
Things
a
that
while.
filter that natural process.
Yes. But there are so many people who are so disorganized, upset, crazy, whatever, that they can't do it, that they don't do it. And this is often when we're into diagnosis, this is often what we do to diagnose people, is talk about how they do things. And so, early on, when I'm looking at a student, I want him to see How much does she already have? Is she picking up on who I am?
How clear are those channels? Well, I was going to ask, and this brings the question forward, are there particular things that set apart exceptional therapists or exceptional teachers, qualities that are particular? Or maybe they're different for teachers and therapists?
There's one, I think, above all others.
Then,
Experience.
yeah.
To me, it's like, for me, everybody who comes that I work with, that I see, that I talk to, I have to know what my attachment is becoming. Am I attaching to them? And if I'm not, why not? What's going on with me? So I'm very, very aware of it. And at the same time, I'm very aware of how they're responding to what I'm doing. Because they're going to start right away. So it's like we're like two people who are checking each other out. And we don't ever say that out loud, but we all know it. It's one of the things that I enjoy. When I travel, one of my favorite times is waiting for a plane. Waiting for a plane is watching people be the way they are. There are those who sit down, get comfortable, read a book, whatever it is. But there's somebody who can't sit still, who's got to move around, who's got to look. And the task often is that because you had good upbringing, you're careful about how you do it. Is that if somebody were primitive, he'd be looking at you and doing very strange things. And when you look around you, if you're there waiting for a plane, you see a lot of people who are watching other people as well. Mm-hmm. We are all checking each other out, no matter where we are. If it's a different environment, there are different people, and you're checking them out. But you have to do it if you had good upbringing. If you had bad upbringing, the police are going to be called. He's not civilized. And that's often, it's like, we are as a species pretty well civilized. You sit in the waiting room and waiting for a plane. You can talk to anybody you want to talk if you want to, or you can make a comment to them if you know how to do it. Otherwise, you're going to sit there unable to talk.
So, using those foundational things without too many difficult filters in the way, and then gaining the primary thing, which is experience. Mm-hmm. You get better at this.
Yes.
I remember once someone asking you in a training session, I think you'd done a piece of really good work with someone or something, and someone asked the typical kind of question, like, how do you do that? And you said, well, you start. You didn't say end. You start with sitting in this chair for 10,000 hours. Mm-hmm. That's the start.
Yes.
So you were saying, that's the beginning, is the experience.
And so much of this therapy is built out on experience. People without experience are lost. So if I had to go back, it was like, that's why when I'm teaching, I'm aware of the only thing I can hope to do is get them to the point where what they're doing is experiential. Mm-hmm. See, there are thousands and hundreds of thousands of hours in that group.
Oh, in the picture of your students here? Mm-hmm.
Those are people who know people better than anybody. Mm-hmm. Because they've been there in the chair, listening, talking, working with everything.
So that capacity for relatedness that you're talking about, that's where it's refined.
Yes. And if you're not related, what are you doing there?
Oh, what batteries?
It says 10 on top and 4.35 at the bottom. Moving. I don't know what that means. Okay, I was, in follow-up in this capacity for relatedness, I was going to ask some about, all of my training and every bit of my therapy has been in group. I've really not done, almost no individual work like that, and not a single kind of following you around kind of thing. It's always been in a group. Is that something that you kind of lean towards or prefer because of the experience that's gained in that context?
Yeah. See, all of us have frames of reference that we work through, that we got early on to start with, and sort of serves as a foundation of how we work. And to me, I grew up in a family, and my family was a very vital part of my life. And the older I get, the more I recognize how many things were important, why they were important. For instance, my parenting very largely came from my two sisters. They were older. They were both teenagers when I was born. So in many ways, I was also a sickly kid, so guess who helped to take care of me? And my mother being hypochondriacal, she could medicate me, but she couldn't comfort me. I couldn't attach to her. I attached to my older sister. My older sister was a school teacher, and a good one, I think. And she thought, as a little brother, I was wonderful after I stopped crying. And in some ways, that family process is the world that I grew up in. A father, a mother, a sister, two older sisters. And to me, so much of what I do when I'm working with people, I'm using that as a kind of a frame of reference. Most people have had not too different a family experience, but that family is important. Is that, again, attachments are interesting because my attachments were primarily with my older sister, somewhat with my younger sister, a little with my mother, probably as much negative as positive with my father. And that was the array of attachments that gave me security growing up. And it was most fortunate for me is that my two older sisters, by the time I was in school, were school teachers. So you can imagine what it is to grow up with two sister school teachers. Because they are already seeing me as a student as much as a younger brother. Is how I was doing in school was important. They didn't say so.
You just knew so. And they did too.
You just felt it.
Yeah.
I loved to read very early on. It was to me, tell people, I have a picture of my first grade, grade school that I went to. The name of the school?
Gladfelter?
Gladfelter School.
Oh.
Why was it named Gladfelter School? Because my father had donated the land that the building was on, and he helped build it. So I went to the Gladfelter School. In the Gladfelter School, which looks like a big building, it was really very hollow inside. This is northern Wisconsin, and this is where winters are real. And so there's a furnace underneath in the center of that thing that I helped my dad cut the wood to put in the basement to heat the thing. In the school, we had a bookcase this wide, this tall. How many books? Not that many. There was a set of World Book encyclopedias, and then an assortment of books. I doubt that anybody ever. I suspect most of those books were donated. That was my guess about it. But I had read almost everything by the time I was in the 5th or 6th grade.
You just read those books?
Yes. My fear was that I wouldn't find anything to read.
And you retain that fear to this day, probably.
Why do you think these bills and books are around me? That's my security blanket, those books. And so there was that part of me, and then my sisters caught on to what was going on. So my younger sister took me into town to the fire station that had a library upstairs over the fire station. It was with a sigh of relief I walked in and saw, oh, a humongous bunch of books. Books with pictures in them and words in them and so on. And by that time, I had already gotten enamored with words. I realized words are important. And so I got a library card.
You weren't going to run out now.
But to me, to have an adequate supply of books was really very important. And I was the kind of kid who I always complained because I never had. Other kids had allowances. I never had an allowance. I don't know why I didn't. But anytime I had some money, I would buy pulp fiction magazines. I don't know that I see those around anymore, but I had a favorite. My favorite was G8 and his Battle Aces, World War I fighter stories. Oh, these were, G8 and his Battle Aces were just the greatest. And then there were a couple of westerns and, I forget what the magician was. It was a great magician and his stories and ghost stories. And I loved, I loved the fantasy fiction and those flying stories. But I read, it's like the story. The name of the game is, where's John? Oh, he's somewhere with his nose in a book.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. And so any amount of money could get, I would buy these cheap pulp fiction books. And they didn't quite understand what that was all about. But they put up with it. And then when I could get a real book, which was on my birthday, sometimes somebody would buy me a real hardbound book. That was pretty good stuff.
Yeah.
That was, and the other thing that I was remembering is the first book that I read all the way through, a grown-up book, was, gosh, I wish I could think of the name of it. But anyway, it was a Dickens book. It was Charles Dickens.
David Copperfield or something? Uh-huh.
David Copperfield.
Uh-huh.
It was the first grown-up book I ever read, and that, to me, it was, hey, that was great reading. That was...
It is good reading.
It was...
So you got enamored with books and words. Is that part of what got you interested in teaching, as well as your older sisters? But
It was mostly about what reading was about, because I remember learning to read. And I don't know if you did, but I learned by the teachers using flashcards. Mm-hmm. They would show you the words on the card, and you would read the cards. They would start out with just words, and then pretty soon sentences, and pretty soon you were reading Dick and Jane. And Dick and Jane set you on the cars that you could never return from.
once you could read.
Once I could read. So I lived in the world of reading and radio. Mm-hmm. Radio was the other thing that to me was information and stories and...
So part of what you're talking about is a world of imagination and creativity, not stimulation, like now.
Well, on a farm, the world of stimulation is work world.
Mhm.
So you learn how to do all the things on a farm that farmers do. And you learn it the hard way. You learn it by messing it up and having to learn how to do it again. So it's not as though you had a teacher. My father wouldn't teach me anything. It was just go do it. And if you didn't do it, what's your problem?
That's how you learned it.
That's how you learn it. You didn't.
Yeah.
Nobody said, well, we're going to take time to teach you.
Mhm.
Teachers taught me in school, but that was the only teaching that I got
Mhm.
in those days, at least that part of the world.
So the Dr. John Gladfelter of AGPA and the medical school and all that is a far cry from sorting it out on the farm on your own. So if what would you want people to know? Because people have all kind of ideas about what it means to be a therapist, and what it means to train people, teach them. They have tons of ideas. They're all mostly odd about what it really means. But if you wanted people to really understand what it means to do transformational work, what would you tell them?
If you're not curious about people, don't bother.
So it's mostly to do with curiosity about people.
I was curious about everything. I remember one of the best presents I ever got was for my birthday when I got my first microscope. It was a microscope for a 10-year-old, 12-year-old. It was the right age. And I could see things that I'd never seen before. Miracle.
Yeah.
There were so many things like that that I was learning about, curious about learning about. Like, one of the things I was mentioning earlier is the reason I want a telescope is I'm curious. I've been subscribing to an astronomy magazine for 40 years. I want to see it through an eyepiece.
See it for yourself.
See it for myself.
Uh-huh.
Because I can remember, I think I was a freshman in college, I think, when I built my first telescope. Got a lens, got a long tube, got an eyepiece, and saw the rings of Saturn. It was a miracle. So I was hooked on astronomy forever. And I love, I'm just curious. I want to see what it looks like. I can see it in a picture. Sure, I understand it. It's not the same.
And the same with people. If you're not curious about
Same
people, don't bother.
with people, same with people. Absolutely.
Is there anything else that you would say about what it means to be who you are and what you do that you want people to know about?
Well, you have to care about people. And hopefully you care about everything. Hopefully you have, from my point of view, a kind of love of life and love of the world that you live in.
Yeah.
It's that damnedest thing going. To me, one of the things I'd love to do is, I love to watch the History Channel, for instance. I watch that most of the time. I don't read a newspaper, I read The Economist. Because if you want to know what's going on in the world, you read The Economist. You don't get that in the newspapers. They don't know about it, I guess. I don't know.
But this love of people and love of the world is certainly what you transmitted to us as students. That comes across.
I hope it does, because this is why when I'm in the waiting for a plane and I look around me, I care about those people. I cannot not care about them. That's what people are about. If you don't care about people, what are you in this life for? And because it is sort of like, the word that is so bandied about and used, and I think in many ways in our world, as a media, it gets trivialized. But caring about people is really all there is in life. It's, what are you here for? To care about people and people to care about you. That's one of the things that I'm always puzzled about and joyful about, is I think that bunch of people care about me.
Well, and that picture was taken in what anniversary?
80th.
Your 80th birthday.
80th. See, and I even do what any good family person does.
Oh, you carry it with you?
I carry a picture of my family. Well, of course.
And those are your students?
They are some of my students.
Yeah.
There.
That's quite a group.
Yes.
I know most of those people.
Yeah, you sure do.
Yeah.
Fair number of them are fielding graduates.
That's right. There you are, right in the middle of them.
Yep.
In a way, that's also why we're doing what we're doing today.
Yeah.
Because family meetings, sometimes it's nice to have the video
Mm-hmm.
of connection. So thank you
Mm-hmm.
for taking the time.
Mm-hmm.